Anywhere in the world, shut up. Got it? Never talk to me. Ever. Shut your mouth.
As a matter of fact.
Your husband and your children. Talk to them.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, October 15th, 2019. It is 9:30, the regularly scheduled time for the meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect that Commissioners Decker, Soboroff, Bonner, Figueroa are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Turning to our agenda, the first three items on the agenda, Madam Secretary, are donations. Are there public comment cards on those items?
Yes, we do. On item A, we have Mr. Herman.
I'm sorry, just tell me the number on each item. On A, it's one?
1. B, we have 1. C, we have 2.
Two. Very good. Commissioners, are there any questions on items A through C? No? No. C, no questions. We'll go immediately to public comment. I believe you said Mr. Herman is on A?
Yes, that's
Is he
correct.
also on B and C?
Yes, he is.
Mr. Herman, sir? And who is the next speaker on C, by the way?
Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster, thank you. Mr. Herman, A, B, and C, sir.
Excuse me, ma'am, but for the record, it's Batman. So, LLC has joined, Century City Mall in the recruitment of various donations on behalf of cadet programs. Well, my interest in opposition is that young children should not be unsupervised, while with grown men and women who fuck cadets. Item 1A, BPC 190275. Approve the department's report, accept such donations, how disgraceful. Set an example for our children, our future police officers, in the department's report dated for October 8th, 2019. Many of your speakers have come here with recommendations that you ignore, and that shall be instituted as retaliation and harassment for free speech that benefit such a program of donations of those five, $2,450, $1,750, $361, $301, and least but to say, and if they spend $1,560 on various divisional cadet programs, if I could, I would call 323-330-9803 to report to the goddamn Homeland Security that police are fucking our cadets.
Thank you, sir. Item C, excuse me, item B. Item B.
B, department's report, approve all these donations from $10,000 to the lowest bid of $350 from various donors to benefit several departments' events to submit the cadet program in which cadets used our vehicles, stole our radios, used our bulletproof vests in their process of departments navigating our cadets in their programs as set forth. Such embarrassment. How dare you accept such donations after the public has demanded and requested to see an outline of how these donations benefit our young youth of our future police department. as opposed to becoming pimps and whores to a condition of disgrace by the Gotham, Los Angeles City. How dare you?
Very well, item C, sir.
Ma'am, I still have 55 seconds according to my time. I'm taking a breather.
That's fine.
So the recommendations for the board action: no engagement by our mayor. No elected official submitted a report in declaring whether or not these donations are adequate proof that the system in Los Angeles is fucked up. We may proceed, madam, to item C now.
Very well, thank you, sir. Item C. Please reset the clock. Thank you.
Thank you. Hollywood Area Holiday Party. Hollywood. Notorious Hollywood, known for lavish parties. And a $25,000 donation from the Museum of Hollywood. The museum that has underscored our proprieties in life due to the fact, and I'll read it into the record. Excuse me, Sir, I have the floor. May I continue, please? Thank you for not sharing that transparency of a conversation. Review the department's report. Here we go. The mayor, Eric Caca Garcetti, toilet, HHH toilet mayor, who has not done anything positive, has not done anything right
Madam President, he's off topic.
under
Herman,
Hollywood
bring it back to the
area
topic of
holiday
the donation.
parties.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, please don't bring disgrace. Allow me to participate. Allow me to have this activity of engagement. Otherwise, it's not free speech no more. It's called monitoring speech. So in closing to the department's report, the transmit of the mayor and those fucking 15 city council to accept these donations is a matter of conflict of interest, because we still have not seen a dialogue of having these donations and all your submitted records to see how this process actually benefits the community. D for dummy, I'm ready.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster, you're next, sir.
Madam, I had a card on D as well.
We're just dealing in A, B, and C right now,
Oh,
sir.
okay, okay.
Thank you.
Here's my other two cards for the record, item 2 and
You
item 3.
please hand them in per usual. Mr. Foster, please take the podium, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Take it outside or take it to North South Carolina, where you want me to take it? Hello, C, Hollywood Area Holiday Party. You know, anything holidays, satanic. If it doesn't have Jesus in it, it's not alive, it doesn't live. And we know that LA, Los Angeles, California, has to abide by the separation of church and state, which is completely satanic. That's why it's a holiday party. Because this place is so satanic, it's absolutely disgusting. And you're going to give money over to something that's a satanic entity, a holiday party. You're going to spend $25,000 on Satan. I think you all need to clean out your heart, because this is satanic.
Thank you, sir. With respect to item 1A, is there a motion to approve the department's
So
report?
moved.
Second? Second. All in favor? Yes, I know, I'm getting to that, ma'am. It's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes 4-0. With respect to item 1C, I'll get back to 1B in one moment. The request is to review the report and transmit to the mayor and city council for acceptance. Is
So
there a
moved.
motion? Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It passes 4-0. We did receive 2 late cards on item 1B, and I will accept those. Mr. Smith and then Ms. Abdullah. That was the order I received them. Is Mr. Smith here? Oh,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Mike. I see on the agenda, all of these donations are lumped in together. And I'm just questioning if, for example, Mr. Bonner, have you read through all these? Do you know what all these are for when you surely approve it? These are going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of donations. If you click on the link and you go through, there's supposedly like a description for each one, but we've got I'll just pick one out here. The Supporters of Law Enforcement in Devonshire, who use the acronym SOLID, are donating $21,000 for the Baker to Vegas run and $15,000 for the Devonshire's holiday party. And then if you scroll down, there's a description of what these are supposedly for. The donation for the $15,000 for the holiday party. The donation is for the benefit of Devonshire area. The approved funds will be used for Devonshire area holiday party expenses, such as venue and dinner and dessert, which will be held on December 20th, 2019. What's the audit process for accepting $15,000 from an obviously very pro-police organization in the Valley that has, we're reading all these stories about secret Facebook groups in Devonshire of vigilantism against homeless people. Are these the kind of groups that are donating this money? How many people are on the board or whatever of Solid in Devonshire that are donating $15,000? What is it actually being used for? What's the audit process for that, Mr. Bonner?
Dr. Abdullah.
I'll echo everything that Adam just said, Mr. Smith just said. I also want to ask if you've even looked at where these various donations are coming from and where these various donations are going to, because I would guess that most of you have not clicked on that link to look at each and every one of these. It's almost a dozen donations. And I think that's your job. As the oversight body, it's your job to know where these are coming from and where it's going to. I just want to uplift the last time we were here and we talked about the ad buy on Breitbart, right? That was you all not doing your job and kind of overseeing what the ad buys would look like. So when we talk about a donation coming from some vague group, it's really important that you investigate who those groups are and who you are linking up with. And I would say that this is an effort to kind of hide behind, you all doing the very minimal that you're required to do by putting everything in one item and not breaking out where these are coming from. Various means nothing, right? We don't know what the programs are. We don't know where the donations are coming from. And then finally, I think that we need to really scrutinize anything to do with the cadet program. So when you think about children and how they've been treated by LAPD, the sexual preying on the children sexually by officers, right, which is not in the too distant past. And so for you to present this without really scrutinizing it is a huge problem. And so I hope that you will do something. You can pause this. You can say, no, let's look at it, and then come back and vote.
Thank you, ma'am. The requested action for the board is to approve the report and accept the donations. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
It has moved. Is it seconded? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes 4-0.
I had a question. One, not on the items that we just voted on.
Okay,
but,
very good.
Could you remind us also there's an inquiry that's outstanding on
Yes, the
ongoing
inspector,
analysis of donations
this
generally?
board had previously requested that the Inspector General conduct an audit of the donation process and the oversight. And Mr. Inspector General, can you just update us on that process? I realize we only passed that motion, I believe, within the last month or so. But if you could just advise us very quickly in response to Mr. Bonner's question.
Yes, so it's a project that we're happy to take on. It is not one that is has been scheduled for a due date yet. We had talked about sometime early in 2020 getting that produced, but as the commission sets its priorities for the next year, we'll make sure to fold that in the early part of 2020.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bonner. We're moving on to item D, which is the department's report dated October 2nd relative to its response to the Inspector General's review of selected data-driven policing policies. And just for context, I will note that the commission heard the IG's report back in March in response to, generated from originally a July 24th, 2018 special meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners to discuss data-driven policing strategies. There were a number of presentations made at that time. I'll note, while I was not on the board at the time, I have reviewed that video. In August, following that meeting, the board adopted a motion to review the 3 programs. The IG then conducted its evaluation, and that report was presented in March. And today, the commission is receiving the department's response to that report. Procedurally, Mr. Tiefenk or Mr. Inspector General, did I leave anything out, or any member of the commission? I have not left anything out. Okay.
No, ma'am. Just for the record, Commissioner Figueroa is recusing herself from this item, so she stepped out of the room.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will note also for the record that the commission... ladies and gentlemen, could we please have some order, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll also state for the record that the commission has received a number of emails from members of the public, generally falling under the category of stopping predictive policing. We've received a letter from concerned faculty and students challenging the academic findings on predictive policing and other algorithms based for location-based methodologies. And we've received some materials from Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, an email addressing predictive policing. They also included the letter signed by academics and students. And I would also say at our last meeting, Stop LAPD Spying also presented us with a letter generally regarding laser zones. I think that summarizes much of the material that we've received from members of the public. Now, having stated all of that, I see that we have representatives from the department here who plan on providing us with an overview of their response to the IG's report. If you could begin by introducing yourselves, and then please give us your overview of this report.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bob Arcos from the Office of Operations.
Mike Mkunis, Office of Operations.
So good morning, Commissioners, and thanks again for the patience as we work on formalizing and socializing our department-wide data-driven policing strategies with an emphasis on community focus. I have a few remarks, and I know you'll have several questions for us. As you may recall, earlier in commission, we had discussed our next steps forward in the design and implementation of precision policing. And discussions with the Chief of Police and his direct reports suggested that placing labels or acronyms and descriptions of crime reduction activities was not always necessary, for the simple reason that data-driven policing strategies with community-focused programs essentially captures this department's work and preparation to reduce the fear and incidence of crime in our communities. Therefore, we've decided not to use a label of precision policing as our next iteration of crime reduction strategies.
That's just a euphemism.
Rather,
I can't hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, please allow the department to present its response. Thank you.
I still can't hear.
Yeah. Rather, we will keep it to the foundation and fundamentals of this department that has seen successive years of crime reduction through our data-driven policing strategies. As to the report, the department has addressed 3 main categories of the OIG's report. The offender-based program, as you know, LASER has been discontinued, as well as the use of the terminology of anchor points and the use and creation of chronic offender bulletins. We will continue to use offender-based investigations that address identified persons on parole or probation, wanted suspects identified by victims or witnesses, that includes warrants and our open investigation reports. Additionally, the reconfiguration of Metropolitan Division will provide much more focus on outstanding warrant suspects, felony and high-grade misdemeanors, and an ability to actively pursue known murder suspects and violent crime suspects. Also, we will continue our work with intervention and prevention partners, community-based organizations, and assistance in our communities. As to location-based programs, the department will continue to use PredPol as one of our location-based strategies for property crime only. As a reminder, PredPol relies on data from victims that include 4 specific data points: type of crime, location of crime, date and time, and day of the week. We will continue to use other strategies such as lock it, hide it, keep it, hide, and others to address property crime. One of the most critical references made by the Inspector General in the report was a lack of oversight, uniformity, and consistency in our application of crime reduction strategies across the department. The Office of Operations has been given the responsibility to ensure effective oversight that is consistently applied across all 21 areas and 4 geographic bureaus. Therefore, we have created a data-driven policing unit that will include 4 officers that it has oversight from a sergeant and a lieutenant in the Office of Operations to design, socialization, and implementation of a crime reduction guidebook that will focus on the fundamentals of daily crime, crime control, the Community Safety Operations Center, and CompStat with our community-focused activities. We'll also include the incorporation of SARA projects with our senior lead officers. We'll do command officer training through a general staff meeting, and we will also train our crime analysis details and our crime intel details for consistency and application of the guidebook. I anticipate that the draft will be done by the end of this month and begin training department-wide in November, December, and effectively begin measuring our efforts in January of 2020. That then concludes my remarks, and we're open to your questions, commissioners.
Very good. Commissioner Bonner, I know you've been working on this issue. Do you want to begin questioning first?
Sure. Thank you. First, I'm going to start off with a question generally for the Inspector General, if I could, since they're responding to your March 12th report. The question, I'm assuming you also had an opportunity to review the response, and do you find it generally responsive, or is there any areas that you felt were unaddressed?
So speaking broadly, I'd say for us, the discontinuation of the laser program, the chronic offender bulletins, clearly addresses a large segment of the concerns that we raised in our report, and so that answers sort of a number of the questions. We are kind of awaiting to see what is contained in the guidebook that was discussed by the chief. I think just sort of seeing what material is in there will be important for us. I think we're optimistic and hopeful that will continue the changes and the reforms to these programs that we hope to see, but we haven't had a chance to see it yet, so we can't comment on it. And then finally, we're encouraged as well by the focus on greater oversight and the connection to independent sort of academic review of these programs. But as those are still forthcoming and only development phase, it's hard for us to make any further comment on them, but we think those are hopefully moving in the right direction as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, if I could just want to...
Excuse me, Chief. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It makes it very hard to hear with all the comments coming. I asked you hold your comments until public comment. If that does not happen, I'll have to clear the room and we'll continue with our meeting. I'd rather not do that because public comment on this item is extremely important to me and the others. However, continued interruption will result in my having to clear the room. So please, I ask for you to give your attention right now. Excuse me?
I can't hear.
Very well. Sir, this is the final chance for everyone to please hold your comments. Thank you very much. Chief?
Just wanted to address the guidebook, and we can have more discussion and questions, but the guidebook is primarily the vehicle to help provide the consistency and uniformity across the department. As discussed earlier, what the IG did note was there was different applications and different methods and utilization of the staples of our crime fighting strategies, which includes daily crime. So we wanted to memorialize that, so it's uniformly addressed across 21 areas and 4 geographic bureaus on how we conduct daily crime. Also how we use crime control, how we use the Community Safety Operations Center, and how we prepare for CompStat in that. And then with that, we will provide the myriad of best practices and innovative uses of community-focused programs. That's all that's going to be included in this guidebook. It's not going to be anything that is new or just recently developed. We're just trying to put it in one place so all of our captains across the areas and all our chiefs across the bureaus can look to these this guidebook as a practice and a method of accomplishing the task of crime reduction strategies.
Okay, so then I did have a few questions specifically to the guidebook, but I think many of the other questions that I'm going to go through, some of which will hopefully inform some of the thinking as the guidebook is coming together. But before I get there, generally speaking, because I aware there's been a number of comments about the moving away from the chronic offender bulletins and some of that up. So just let me ask you just quickly about that in terms of, are there records still around? Like, are there chronic offender bulletins that are still in existence, and anyone doing anything with them in any way, shape, or form?
So there was a CPRA request for the chronic offender bulletins that were created during the duration of Laser, which we have provided to the city attorney. It's approximately 600 plus bulletins that were collected, put in a matrix for the city attorney to be responsive to the CPRA request, and those were all provided to the city attorney to this request. So those bulletins have all been pulled, and we are no longer using the term chronic offender. Was
before I just what I want to make sure specifically about this is there, if you have those 600 or so, are they actionable in any way? Is anybody using them for any purpose whatsoever as we sit here now, other than the consistent with the document retention policy?
No, sir, they're not.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to go to the document itself, the written response that was submitted today, and I'm going to start first with the offender-based programs, and in particular on pages 1 and 2, there's a couple references starting at the bottom of page 1 that says the department will no longer track any individual based solely on the frequency of certain interactions, and then there's continues to say, nor will it develop specific strategies related to individuals based solely on the criteria of being previously described as a chronic offender. And specifically with regard to the couple references to based solely on, are there other factors or circumstances that are being considered along with these, or what's the emphasis on based solely?
So good morning. So we have to separate. We had chronic offender bulletins that were tied into our laser zones that have been discontinued. We do have folks that are out there that are on probation parole that have committed multiple violations of, say, GTA, for instance, right? So they've committed multiple violations. They've been arrested numerous times. Those folks
I can't hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, please
I still can't hear.
stop yelling out. We cannot hear the presenters. Commander.
So we have individuals that are repeat offenders that have a high rate for recidivism for GTA type of crimes. So they are wanted suspects. They've been identified, they've been vetted, they've been worked by detectives that our folks create wanted flyers to go after and to hopefully arrest based on a specific crime. So we don't have chronic offenders for laser zones, but we do have repeat offenders that are wanted for various types of
Right.
crimes.
So when someone shows up in one of the state or county databases, again, what I'm wanting to make sure is you have information that may come from the state or county database. But again, referencing here when you're saying you're not looking at considering things based solely on their previously being described as a chronic offender, what I'm wanting to make sure is that you're not also going back to consider whether they were previously a chronic offender.
So
in
the
other words,
chronic-
that we put a nail in the coffin of that data and
So
that
based on-
information, and you're not taking that into consideration now as you're reviewing these other databases.
Correct. So they're from frequency of contacts and based on the way the chronic offenders used to work, we are no longer using that. But I did want to clarify, there are folks out there that have multiple arrests that are still being monitored by the police department.
Got it.
But based on frequency of contacts solely, it's done.
And I gather that from some of the chief's remarks also that some of this, at least as I'm still learning in this area, falls under the broad aegis of various forms of crime analysis, just general crime analysis. And is it accurate that departments are required in some way to do some form of crime analysis? In other words, for accreditation or other purposes.
Or not for accreditation. So our crime analysis is to solve crime. You know, we have numerous victims that are victims of crime, and our job is to identify suspects, work with our victims, evaluate crime reports, and look at all our different aspects so we can bring justice to the families that are victims of crimes. So there's no accreditation per se to do any of that. Our business is to reduce crime, is to provide safety to the folks in our communities. And, you know, there's crime reports that are generated that have specific information, date, time, crime of location, or date, time, and location. And there's various things on an investigative report that are provided by the victim that we go after.
Right, but for the main point is that at least if there's not a third-party mandate of some kind,
No.
that this program, and as it's laid out in the guidebook and so on, is and can be what we decide it is, right? In other words, there isn't any third-party requirement or standards that we'll be meeting. It'll be what we determine is most appropriate.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And then, generally speaking, since and correct me if I'm wrong, but the theme that I pick up from this is that you're shifting to a reliance on some traditional crime analysis tools, but also these various databases that are maintained by the state and county entities. And there's a footnote on the second page that talks about those databases. Since I assume any data you're going to use, you're going to want it to be accurate and reliable and all the rest. And so the question is, what do we know about the sanctity of those databases? And there's a discussion in that second footnote about them being periodically audited by the FBI or the Department of Justice.
Right.
Any known or historical information about any problems with those databases? Are they viewed as a gold standard of sort in law enforcement, or are we going to need to understand potential issues with those as well?
I think we're all dependent on the oversight of those databases through the federal and state level. At the level of an inspector general per se is something historic that I can tell you of most recent is the Cal Gang database was audited and found some deficiencies in the programming itself on how people were entered into the system, and that was brought to the department's attention. And there was a number of inspections that were required of the department and audits to go back in there and remove folks that had been put in there erroneously. So those things exist, and they're brought to the department's attention.
And then, so along those lines, I think on page 3, there's also a reference. This is also in a footnote. There's a reference to a process. It seems that someone goes through if they are contesting some information that caused them to be the subject of some enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe or discuss a little briefly what that, because since I assume that would be the process heretofore or going forward that someone would rely upon. So can you describe that a little bit as to what that consists of?
Sure. So we do have a department manual section 61.15 that advises and provides a structure when you come across an individual that wants to contest some type of warrant or some type of entry in a database. We do have an LAPD form that is submitted upon request once we verify. The verification procedures are we check all of our police records. We verify with our R&I records and identification section, and then we contact the local agency. If it's not an LAPD warrant, we contact the local agency where, say, a warrant was issued to verify it to see if that individual is still actively in the warrants. And then part of that process is to release and then request report or submit a document to remove that individual from any database where that person was.
Does it happen with any frequency? I mean, that someone can test along those lines, and do you need a lawyer to get through all of what you're describing, or how proactive is the department when someone raises that concern?
So upon any contact, our officers are instructed they have to verify the warrant. They have to verify that the person is actually in a database that is wanted for a particular crime. So that's the first step, and we request there's fingerprinting analysis that's done, for a verification. But there's a strict line of verification measures that are in place to ensure that the person that's in that database that is potentially being arrested for a warrant is that person.
Yeah, as to the frequency, it happens. It happens, and sometimes it's the department, the employee will determine that through their review of the warrant and through phone calls to verify, or it may happen when the person arrested goes into court and they have a public defender that does determine that it was not them that was subject to the warrant, and then it's cleared. But as to the frequency, I can't give you a total number, but it does happen.
On a regular, would you say? Regularly?
I don't know what you mean by regular.
Regularly, what I mean is,
Like
is
every
it
day?
such that you have people who are staffed and trained and assigned to resolving and responding to those kinds of?
Well, everyone in the department is trained to ensure that the person that they have in custody is that person that's listed in the warrant.
Is this the kind of thing, like the unit that you're setting up, the 4 officers, is this the kind of thing that they would be doing, or would it be done outside of?
No, sir. It would not be.
Let me move on to, on page 3, there's also a reference to the training, and there's a statement that there would be some training on the legal considerations for using the reported information. Can you, assuming this will be in the guidebook as well, but can you give some examples of some of the legal considerations that are involved?
So the legal considerations will not be included in the guidebook, Commissioner. If this is something that the Commission would like to see in there, we could certainly carve something out to place it in there. The guidebook, again, is procedural. It's practices of doing daily crime and crime reduction strategies. Legal consideration starts in the academy with our recruits. They're getting a number of hours on constitutional policing, on the law, on consensual encounter to reasonable suspicion to probable cause to arrest. And that continues in an officer's career. For us to try and codify and place something like that in a guidebook, I don't think serves a purpose. This is ongoing. It's happening through in-service training. It's happening in roll call training. It's happening in our own officers' education and development. So don't see a need for it to do that. But like I said, if the Commission sees that it's necessary to place in there, we certainly would be open to putting it in there.
Well, it's an area that I'll want to know some more about, because in order to determine whether it needs to be addressed in the guidebook, I need to know what they are. So I need a little more information as to the nature of the training and what are some of the legal considerations that are used in reporting the information. I mean, I assume that the comment is here for a reason, providing some assurance, so I'd like to understand a little bit more about that.
Okay.
I'm going to go on to the location-based programs as they're discussed on pages 4 and 5.
I'll do that one. Yeah, sir.
I don't recall seeing in this latest draft, but in some earlier drafts, there was still some, I'm going to talk a little bit about the continuing challenge of getting a hold of some of the labels and terms and things.
Sure.
And there was, I saw some reference earlier to, the laser zones, and then this predictive area and some neighborhood areas or something. What is the difference, for example, between a laser zone and a predictive area?
So a laser zone, when it was started, were areas that concentrated with specific gun violence, like violent crimes that where a gun was involved. And the difference is that the zones were set by personnel in a command, in a division, whereas predictive policing is set by date, time, location, and day of the week. So the difference is that at this point you don't have personnel that are trying to form general boxes and pre-staging certain areas in a certain police division, whereas Predpol, it's date, time, location, and the data is within 3 or 4 different categories, and that's sort of the main difference of what a laser zone was. And Predpol is in regards to property crime, and laser zones we're looking at areas that had high concentration of gun violence.
But in my understanding, so the laser zone was a construct that was created by, you're saying, by an officer or personnel?
It was a historic look at 7 years of gun violence. 7 years of gun violence, and from that analysis, the command, and at the time working with Dr. Yoshida, they developed what would be a corridor or a specific segment area in that community that had this historic crime. Predictive policing, the Predpol, the box is 500 by 500 square feet. And these change daily, and they move through the property crimes that are occurring in that command. So that's the difference.
But I'm also understanding the latter, that is based on the basic information coming from crime reports.
Yes, sir.
As opposed to someone taking that information, adding some other ingredients to it, and creating a laser zone.
That's exactly right. Correct, sir.
Right.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Chief, was there? Okay. Yep. Are there instances of overlap where there may be an offender who's identified in one of these areas who might still be also show up in some other program, whether it's related to a predictive area or something else, or is it all going to now be still related to these crime reports?
So certainly that could occur. So predictive policing, again, is solely based on property crime. And the laser zone activities were focused on violent crime offenders. Does not mean that a violent crime offender could not be caught up in doing it in a property crime. So they could be arrested that way, and they could be determined during the investigation of that person when they were arrested for the property crime that they were also listed as a chronic offender on a bulletin. That did occur. That happened. And
I'm assuming, though, again, with chronic offenders going away, that element of it would not occur.
Well, I guess it's semantics, so Commissioner. So chronic offender was the term that we coined with laser. We used chronic offender bulletins to capture those folks that were identified in that specific zone. We've always used the term repeat offender. People who are repeat offenders, who are recidivists, that are always out there, we're still going to have that out there. There are folks that are out there that are prolific property crime suspects. They support their drug habit or their livelihood by committing crimes. That's gonna happen. And in many instances, when we do catch them, they do receive some sort of time, but there's also early release, and they're back out there. So it's important for us to stay in tune on who those folks are who are repeat offenders in these communities.
Sir, if I can just add too, there could be an individual that's wanted for a particular crime that could be in a general or predpone area. Or predpol area. So it's possible that folks have been identified on crime reports. There's been warrants issued for their arrest. They could potentially be in a predpol area and contacted by the police.
So before, I want to drill through the semantics a little bit, but just one quick question relative to the using the incidence of calls for service and the crime occurrence within a CompStat reporting period. What is the CompStat reporting period? Is that days, weeks, hours?
So a CompStat reporting period is we call it an extraction period. It's 28 days, it's 4 weeks that we're looking at their Part 1 crime. But it does not preclude us from calling in a command to look at a trend analysis of some crime that's been going on for 6 months or maybe the last year. We look at those things as well. But typically, the preparation for the command to come in to discuss crime in the area is based on a 28-day period, 4-week period.
So putting the labels aside and let me just talk about or ask about some of the attributes. Are there attributes of laser that are going to continue in connection with crime reports? Like, so for example, is there any further use of Palantir?
Sure, we use Palantir for investigations, but we are no longer using anything related to lasers or laser zones. What is
that? I was under the impression that Palantir was only used in connection with laser zone. What else does it do?
It's used for detectives to conduct investigative link analysis and check on different crime reporting in the areas. Palantir has a number of usages. The only things that we took off of the use and application of Palantir has been the dashboard. We're able to look at citywide crime and our analysis of crime, and the application of mission control that Palantir provided to us, where we could put in missions for the commands and we could take a look at them. It was not an effective use or an efficient use of the system, so we decided to shelve those two programs from Palantir.
Dashboard, and what was the other one?
Mission control.
Control.
Yes, sir.
And so does that mean that are you still using and I'm just anything along the lines of algorithms or anything along those lines in connection with these crime reports that are going to be the basis for Predpol going forward?
Well, Predpol is based on algorithms. Yes, it's still part of the system and the tool that it provides the input for the 500 by 500 square foot box for the property crime that's in there. Yes.
So there's still going to be a fair amount of use of Palantir and on some of the legacy elements of that
Yes, sir.
program that were
It's
problematic before?
It's a tool and a system that our investigators use to conduct their investigations in solving crimes. Yes, the Palantir will still be used, as well as others. They use other systems and platforms for investigations.
Will the guidebook lay out in detailed terms that really exactly what that use will consist of with regard to Palantir?
It wasn't designed to do that, Commissioner. Certainly, again, we're open to it in the draft form when we bring it to the Executive Steering Committee to take a look at that.
Is there anything that exists now? Is there or will there be anything outside this guidebook that explains to us what Palantir consists of and how it's being used?
Yes, Palantir is the detectives are trained in the use of Palantir.
No, I'm asking, is there anything like a manual or anything that lays that out in any way?
Yes, sir.
So it could be incorporated in some ways and referenced into the guidebook.
It could be, yes.
There's training that our detectives have to go through in the use of Palantir and be certified in Palantir to use it. So there is a guidebook.
Okay. And in this guidebook, are we, in this change, are we leaving behind some of the terms like dosage and just some of that other terminology that was more relevant to a construct that I understand we're moving away from?
Yeah, I think there's some. Yeah, we're not going to use the word dosage, but we have to measure time spent in certain areas, or whatever you want to call it. We'll call it, but we're not going to say dosage. We'll say measuring time.
I mean, it's a concept and a term that I just personally have a lot of issues with, and I know that others do.
Certainly.
So if we can make sure that we clean that up,
We understand.
as well. There's a comment also that you're reminding officers that mere presence in one of these areas is not the basis for suspicion or so on. How do we know that is actually the approach, on the street?
So
Do we do some after the fact look or something, or how are we assured that people aren't using the mere presence in one of these areas as the basis for stopping or questioning people?
So what we currently have is our AFDR, where any contact with an individual has to be logged and captured. And I believe that there's 43 data points that have to be filled out. And so supervisors, upon review, can look at that.
What's it called?
Our AFDR, Automated Field Data Report. And one of the other ways is we just met with our league and we've been approved to look at body-worn video in comparison to some of the stops out in the field to ensure that what our officers are saying is actually true and correct. And you can review video along with the stops and along with their reports to make sure that they have legal reason and legal justification for a detention.
Will this be the kind of thing, going back to the 4 officers in this unit, is this the kind of thing that they will be charged with looking at on a regular basis?
No, sir.
What will they be doing?
So they're going to be monitoring the use of daily crime control, CSOC, and CompStat, that it's uniformly applied across the 4 areas. So the way we envision this unit and the design of this unit is that they have the ability to be in a situation room where they could plug in every single day so daily crime typically occurs around 9:00 a.m. across the city. So the unit will have the opportunity to plug in and listen to a daily crime meeting being held, say, at Topanga. And they can also plug in at Newton and listen and take some best practices away from this to maybe identify some things that they're straying from that they should be staying a little bit more on track with, and bring those to our attention so we can bring those up to our direct reports in our meetings, et cetera. So that's essentially what we're going to
So
design
when
it
you
for.
come back to issues like this where you're trying to make sure that people have been trained not to use mere presence as a pretext of some kind, but you're trying to understand whether that actually happens, who will be performing that part of it, making sure that what people are trained on is what they're actually doing?
Those kind of things happen from the Office of Inspector General. Those things happen from Audit Division. Those things that are done, or they come up in complaint investigations and from the officers. There's a number of ways that those things come up. The mere presence was designed as a phrase to place in there to remind our officers that we're not looking for a specific person. We're looking for behavior or for activity in these locations. That's what it was designed to do. So.
Okay, one thing that I think we'll want to make sure that as the guidebook comes together on this last point, maybe the Inspector General can correct me also if I'm wrong, but I think one of the findings before, one of the recommendations was to, this is on the accountability piece, was to make sure that like you're going to be accountable
Yes, sir.
ultimately
Yes.
for this. And I think one of the suggestions was to make sure that we have a process that isn't the lagging indicator where, in the context of an audit or something, that may come a year or 16 or 18 months after the fact,
Yeah.
there's problems identified, but that on a regular and ongoing basis, since we're trying to balance out, you're driving the crime, reduction activity, you're trying to balance that out. In my opinion, at least, you should be trying to balance that out with equal pressure for procedural justice, sensitivity to community concerns, and things of that nature.
Yes, sir.
So to achieve that, I think you need to build into the process an ongoing, proactive approach to spot checking for these kinds of things, so that we're not reliant on reports that come up long after the fact.
Okay, understood.
A couple other questions about this broad topic. Is there or will there be just the point I just made? On the one hand, I know that you're going to have a lot of this that will come up in the ComStat discussions and so on. Is there the guidebook going to speak to that balance that I just referred to in terms of, on the one hand, how to better use these programs, but also how to ensure that we have the procedural justice and community sensitivities?
Yes, sir. Well, we're going to include the community focus as a big part of the guidebook. The number of programs that have, again, been successful best practice with the department, and some innovative programs that we're still utilizing. That'll include the community safety partnership as well in there. We're also revitalizing and kind of re-inspiring our senior lead officers. We just had a senior lead officer summit 2 weeks ago on the use and application of SARA, the scanning and analysis, response, and assessment of problematic locations that deal with not just with crime, but with quality of life issues in these communities. Sometimes they go hand in hand to crime problems in these communities. So that'll all be incorporated in the guidebook as well.
And I think you mentioned earlier that you're expecting a draft of that to emerge by the end of the month, October, and then the goal will be to have something, presumably in final by the end of the year or something. Seemed to me that there's a number of things that may need to be included between those 2 points. And the one issue I'd like you to address is your thinking on how we can make sure that the guidebook is informed by a diversity of views. What is the thought that it'll capture some public input, or what is the thinking about? I know there's the subcommittee that will have an opportunity to comment on it, but have you given some thought really as to, since you're putting a lot of effort and time and energy into the production of it,
Yeah, certainly the guidebook is going to be designed from internally for the bureau chiefs and the commands to take a look at that and to provide input. With the executive committee from the commission, we're certainly going to be guided by your recommendations on how this goes out for other inclusion to external stakeholders involved in this. And again, we stand ready to follow through with any of your suggestions or recommendations.
Okay, well, good one. I'm sure we'll have several along those lines.
I'm sure you will.
I would just ask that you do everything possible to stay on the time frame so that we can build into our process whatever time we need to capture a diversity of views. A couple last questions along those lines. This is with regard to the community surveys and others, and you're in conversations with some higher education institutions and so on. What is the thinking about getting the input from academia as opposed to this is on the surveys and finding out, doing some of the review of these programs. Is there any greater benefit of getting that from academia than, say, from audits or the IG or other forms of independent review?
Yeah. I don't know that one outweighs the other. I think they both complement one another, Commissioner. So I think, we're open. I know that we've spoken to the work that Chief Kamala has been doing with academic research and universities who may be weighing in on the design of a community sentiment. Of course, the Inspector General, I'm sure, will provide input as well. So to say one way or the other which one has more weight, I'll leave that to this commission to decide. We, as a department, are looking just for the report back on our work, on our effort.
So I'm wrapping up here, but one of my final questions, this relates to the survey and the conversations you may be having with any of the higher ed institutions. Has there been yet a conversation about how we envision capturing input from at least what I perceive as some of the most vulnerable populations? I'm thinking of, minors, low-income people that may not have the smartphone to respond that way, homeless people, other, so there's a whole swath of people, I think, who are potentially impacted by these programs who are not, at least strike me as probably not likely to fill out a form or go on a website or something like that. What if any conversation has there been so far as to how we envision really getting, input that reaches that far?
Well, I think the conversation is that everyone matters in our communities. So I think that will be part.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, Chief, please continue.
Yeah. So I'm sure that the conversation will be based specifically again on our communities of color that have been, who have the sentiment of being over-policed, and that will also be taken into consideration in the design and development of these surveys. We're working with a number of other organizers and community-based organizations that are working in the LA Unified School District, building bridges with Chief Zipperman. They're also creating surveys for the schools, for the students in schools on their sentiment about the police in their communities and what programs are provided to them as well. So there's a number of activity going on right now to design and develop community sentiment. We also have anecdotal, word of mouth from our Coffee with the Cops, roll calls in the streets, those things, we can't specifically tangibly measure, but it is a way of informally trying to gauge.
I'm just going to ask you to make sure that as you go forward those conversations, whether it's just broadly, for reviewing the programs generally, or particularly as a design of a survey, that issue get special and upfront consideration.
Yes, sir.
That's one of the concerns that I have with the Elucid program that was referenced as well, is it's all smartphone based, and in my opinion, they haven't really demonstrated how you get to, this broader cross section of views. So I'm just pointing out that it's going to be something that is going to get a fair amount of attention to make sure that whatever that tool or tools or come back are really tailored to do that. So those are the main questions that I have, and as I said, I think that today all you're doing is really providing this is your response to the IG's report, and obviously there's a lot of other questions I think that still everyone's anticipating being addressed in the guidebook that the draft of which I know is still forthcoming. So I look forward to receiving that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner, and thanks to you and Commissioner Goldsmith, who I know are on the subcommittee and have been doing a deep dive on all of these issues, so I appreciate that, and for you taking the lead on the questioning. Before I ask my few questions, Commissioner Soboroff, did you want to ask anything?
Sure. Sorry. My question is of the chief. Chief, as we hear statistics and sometimes we agree with methodology and other people don't agree, and sometimes they agree and we don't agree. How do you sift through all that and make your process in making a decision of what our next step is? Truly, this is these redefinitions and we are moving to a next step. How long do you think it'll be to see if this is enough or too much?
Commissioner, I think, first of all, let me thank Chief Arcos and Commander Rincones for their work in this. The analysis of our systems, I think there's feedback that the department received relative to the use of what was then laser and now Predpol, hotspot policing, crime analysis, terms such as how we go back and look at the work of policing in the city. And part of that work, much of that work is building trust, and the trust is that we're engaging in strategies that are time proven, that are not just our own origin, but are representative of input from Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Department of Justice, by Police Executive Research Forum, by the academia. By civil rights groups such as VERA, the Institute of Justice programming. And we look to these various sources and they inform us. We experiment. We try and emerging the efforts of what strategies and programs can improve public safety. This, where we're at today, is just that. It's today. This will be a process that in my 3+ decades I've seen evolve over time. I do believe the overarching nature of community policing, of building trust and partnerships, of problem-solving efforts will be timeless. The manner of how we use data today, though, is to have that informed by the evolution of technology. And as that technology has evolved, how do we take the underlying tenets of patterns and trends, which we know in human behavior exists, and we see it practiced in all types of...
I can't hear. This guy keeps interrupting over and over again.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give your attention to the chief. Chief.
Okay. As we look to the underlying tenets of how we go about policing and building trust, is that we're going to smartly use our precious resources that the public has provided and invested in its police department to build relationships, to build problem-solving efforts, and to prove effective in identifying those responsible for crime and for committing crime, as well as that we recognize that our programs today are much broader than just the interdiction of crime. It's the prevention of crime both by presence as well as by engagement with our communities and their partnerships. It's by investing in social programs. It's a whole of community effort. For today, what we want to do, and I appreciate that the Office of Operations has dedicated resources that in this segment of how we use data and how we use information about the instance of crime and reported instances of who is reportedly involved in that, is that we do so more uniformly. The criticism that we have here of earlier programs is that in 21 areas across the city, they were unevenly applied. I believe, as I said nearly a year ago, or actually more than a year ago, with the best of intentions, an earnestness to be effective and use our resources smartly. But because of a lack of governance, a lack of dedicated resources that would follow the crime control process as far as what the tenets of it were, we saw an inconsistency. This today is meant to say we'll have a guidebook, we'll have an oversight and practice, and these are the defined systems that we will use. And here are some areas that we're going to avoid and we're not going to engage in. For instance, talk about the word dosage, talk about the word chronic offender, talk about the word cancer or excising, those type of phraseology. Again, I think in the earlier point, phrasing that was used with the best of intentions, but had an undermining impact on public trust. So we're sanitizing this. But at the same time, we're pulling out phrases that were offensive. But I do believe that the effort of location-based strategies, of identifying places that form concentrations of crime, and locations which are suffering from instances of violence and serious crime, are methods that we should be aware of.
I can't hear. I'm going to break the quorum if this doesn't stop. And then it stops.
Commissioner,
it's going to be my decision.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your indulgence.
I can't
Members
hear.
of the public, I'm requesting, I truly want to hear your public comment. However, if we lose a quorum, this meeting will be over. Furthermore, I've asked repeatedly for your cooperation. Please give your attention to the chief, and I will work diligently to ensure you each have your time to make your comment. Chief, can you please conclude your comments, sir?
Thank you.
Or finish, I'm sorry, answer the question.
So to Commissioner, the effort of the department here by this report is a snapshot in time. I believe it's representative of our efforts to address the concerns that were earlier identified. And I will say to the critics that this department, its responsibilities to the public safety of this city, involves strategies that understands and has been validated by a multitude of resources. And while there will always be critics about that, our commitment is to try to be transparent and to be and have engaging and listen. But there'll be instances in which we will disagree with critics as well as those who would petition us to go in a different direction. It is a responsibility that I take, and I know this commission does as well, to do so as much as an accepting form as possible, But to police the city without strategies, without identifying that there are patterns, there are systems that allow us to use analytics and use modern tools that while people will believe are racist or have underlying impacts on communities of color, we recognize those criticisms and we're doing everything we can to address it. Thank you.
Please, sir, please stop shouting out.
I just, and thank you very much. A couple of points. One is in regards to the term, some of the terminology. When you get your draft of the guidebook and so on and so forth, I'd encourage you to reflect on. It's not. Some of it is, as you describe, sensitivities to how people may or may not be offended by some of those terms. But also, words matter to the people who are receiving the training and reading the guidebook, right, in terms of how they think about the work that they're undertaking and so on. So I'd encourage you to think about that element of it as well, is that it's not simply the sensibilities of how any individual may think of the term, but also the mindset of the officers that are being trained to carry it out as well. And I don't, this is maybe a side point, but I just say it anyway, that, as I've studied and looked at this a little more, my own view is that to some degree, I think that it's not just the department, but law enforcement generally, I think, overplayed the significance of what they were achieving in 2011 and so on with many of these tools that existed long before that time. And I'm saying some of the traditional policing tools that were repackaged and used in different ways. So there is a lot of semantics around this, I'm saying, but there's a lot of otherwise traditional policing methods that are and should be continued, and it's why I'm suggesting that it does matter how they're packaged and how they're explained clearly and so on, so that they can be received well by those who are charged with carrying them out, but also those on the other end of the efforts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
And Commissioner, are you done, sir? Yes. Okay. I only have a few questions given the conversation that has already happened, and I do want to get to public comment as soon as possible. A few questions and comments. First, running through your report on the offender-based programs. I understand there's been a discontinuation of the programs for over 1 year now, and it has transitioned into essentially a warrant-based system. I would ask the Inspector General to work with the committee, the database committee that consists of Mr. Bonner and Commissioner Goldsmith, to continue its oversight over these programs to ensure that systems like this do not reemerge either accidentally or unintentionally, in terms of, regardless of the words used, that it effectively becomes the similar program and that it remains the warrant-based program that has been presented to us today. But also I would ask to ensure that there's an analysis of any disproportionate impact that the program may have, and to report to the subcommittee on that for a determination of whether anything has to come to the full commission. I'd like to focus my question then on the location-based program, and frankly, many of the comments that have been received that I have read that talk about the differences of opinion within academia on the accuracy or how valid these programs truly are in crime fighting. And I took note in your report on page 7, you indicate that PredPol reduced crime by 7.4%. And I'd like to ask you about that, where that comes from. Is that a citywide assessment? Is it a district? But also, given what the Inspector General's report indicated about some discrepancies and how long police were in certain areas, how do you attribute that crime reduction to PredPol?
Good morning. So that was a study that was conducted in 2015. There was a number of different folks that were on that study that ran the study.
Excuse me, I really want to hear the answer to this question. Please, thank you. Sir, Commander.
So that was a study with Deputy Chief Sean Malinowski, Dr. Brittingham, Dr. Moeller, and basically it was a study that looked at it took Predpol and how it operates in comparison to 3 police divisions: Foothill, North Hollywood, and Southwest. And it had crime analysts from those 3 police divisions attempt to predict where property crime would occur. And it was a comparative type of study that demonstrated that Predpol was able to predict 1.4 to 2 times greater predictability of where property crime would occur. And that's basically because crime analysts have to trend through a lot of data. There's years and years of IRs and crime reports that are taken. Predpol in mechanics can decipher a lot more data and predict at a higher percentage than crime analysts. Not taking anything away from our crime analysts, but when you're looking at 7 years, 6 years, 5 years of data over historic areas where property crime tends to occur, it was able to predict at a higher rate, and that's where that 7.4% reduction comes into play. So that's all it was a comparative type of study that had...
But
I can't hear.
7.4 was the reduction in crime.
In crime volume, yes.
In those 3 divisions?
In comparison in those 3 divisions based on the study, correct.
In those 3 divisions,
Yes.
property crime throughout those divisions went down 7.4%.
They were able to predict, ma'am.
But we don't know how much of that should be attributed to the predictive policing model. Is that correct?
It was saying that the Predpol, the algorithms within Predpol were able to predict at a better percentage for overall crime reduction. And the 7.4 was the percentage that came out of that study, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I think if I'm understanding, based upon the study of those 3 divisions, you did attribute Predpol to the 7.4% based upon the comparative analysis to other divisions. Is that
correct?
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And was that information provided to the Inspector General during his evaluation?
Yeah, our report did reference that as one of 2 studies that have been published previously on these programs.
Right. I didn't ask my question actually as precisely as I probably should have. I knew that you had the information, but did you factor that in when you made your analysis as to and forgive me because I may not ask this as precisely as I want. Your report indicated that there were some concerns about the accuracy of some of the number of hours that were attributed to Predpol. And therefore, I'm asking if the underlying program had some inaccuracies into the amount of police officers that were spending their time doing this predictive policing model. How valid then could the 7.4% be?
So we definitely did not do any kind of analysis of that previous report. We did acknowledge its presence because it was important to us to recognize it. However, our results of the analysis are what you read in the report, stand on their own, that there were inconsistencies that caused challenges for us to be able to determine the success of the program.
Would it be right to say that the department knew of, and I don't know, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, was the department aware of some of these issues that the IG had highlighted, and was that taken into account when the analysis was done?
No, so that report was in 2015,
Yeah.
Commissioner. So I think within the last year and a half, it was brought to our attention the inconsistency in the application of time spent in the Predpol boxes. We started noticing at CompStat inspections that the numbers that we were receiving were not consistent with what Predpol was reporting back to us. So we have stopped that reporting process until we can fix and align our AVL ability and acquiring more of an accuracy of time spent in these boxes.
Okay, I understand, and obviously the commission will want to, if this program continues, we want to monitor it to evaluate its effectiveness, because I think that's, particularly with discrepancies in academic studies, we really want to understand whether it's an effective program. I'm sure the department wants to know if it's effective too. But still any disproportionate impact it may have in any community, because this is property-based. So is this applied all over the city, not just in any one, all over in every division, not just in any selected division?
Every division.
Every
division using Predpol, yes, ma'am.
All right. Unless there are questions, I would like to go to public comment.
Okay.
Madam Secretary, how many cards do we have?
We have 23 cards.
Very well. The first three names, please.
Mr. Herman, Tabitha Jolivet, and Adam Smith.
Mr. Herman?
First saved message. Hey, Herman Manuel, this is Kenny Collins, Secret Service. Wasn't able to make it out, didn't see you yesterday in downtown LA. Just wondering what you were doing this afternoon.
Sir, this is not on the topic of this report.
Can you please give me a call back at 213
Mr. Herman,
330?
you need to get on topic or you'll be asked to sit down.
So the dosage is the use of mythology of crimes in our community. 3 separate TROs, repeated offense by multiple crimes because simply I engage by what law does, punish words. And all I said, if they ever make me carry a rifle, the first man I want to get in my sights is, yes, I'm echoing the various conditions of target laser, hide, locket, and all these pussies that cry TMU, TRO, fuck you. Because racial profiling is a method of no oversight, and for that reason, safety of the community, FBI investigations, FBI probing this commission, FBI looking into matters of criminal threats by Homeland Security. How fucking dare you tell me I'm not on topic? I'm always on topic, except you would rather monitor words, censor free speech, and fuck with my rights as a civil activist. Now you understand where I come from. You see this? That's what it means. 42 U.S.C. 1983. Fuck you.
I just want to uplift the ongoing work that's been done by a variety of community organizing groups who actually work not simply on civil rights like Vera, but actually work to disrupt racist policies that are so pervasive in this city, the ones that are represented here. You're not talking to us. So I just want to go on the record as acknowledging that in trying to sort of validate the instrumentation that you've socially constructed, that it ignores and erases the work of community groups who are actually fighting these racist practices. Chief Moore, I'm glad that you talked about experimentation. You use the language of experimentation to talk about the ways in which technology evolves to help you as the chief of police to identify patterns and trends to predict human behavior. Another way that you've said this is we're using strategies that are validated by a multitude of resources, analytics that this group of folks have described this morning. You try to masquerade this conversation with language that you know is inaccessible to most people, but it's not inaccessible to all of us. As an academic, an actual academic, I can tell you that your strategy of trying to sanitize your discourse, moving from language such as Well, you've heard all of what they said this morning. I don't want to repeat it. My point is that your effort to sanitize language is really euphemistic. And furthermore, it masquerades what we know to be true when we actually study history and when we study actual facts today. All of the practices that you've described reflect what Dr. Ruha Benjamin describes as the new Jim Code. Because from Princeton, a sociologist, she understands the ways in which technology is used to encode and reproduce the existing racial hierarchies that are anti-Black, that displace indigenous populations, that minoritize and dispossess of houseless people. We know that all of these methodologies and strategies are simply a masquerade for your so-called objectivity. And in reality, it's not objective.
Ma'am,
It's rooted
we
in
have,
racist
ma'am, we
system
have other
and
speakers who wish to speak.
Thank
you, ma'am.
Say to you today is,
Please have a seat, ma'am.
who the institutions are that you're working with. For those of us who are academics,
Ma'am,
we will validate.
please have a seat.
We're the ones who
Ma'am,
are social
I'm asking you to have a
science
seat.
trained to do that. And
Doctor.
furthermore, when you talk about predictive policing,
Thank you, ma'am.
it is
Please have a
simply
seat.
The language for
Ma'am.
regression analyses, which are statistical
Ma'am.
analyses that predict very little. of
Ma'am, I'm
human
asking you to have a seat so we can hear from the other public speakers. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am. Ma'am, please have a seat. Please have a seat. Thank you. Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Please proceed.
This is how eugenics was based on. Pseudoscience. This is
Mr. Smith, please begin. Ma'am, if you can't allow other speakers to speak, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room. Well, we need to proceed with the meeting. Sir, if we can, sir, please have a seat. Sir, please have a seat. We're going to take a recess we're going to have a recess right now, and the room will be cleared and we'll proceed with our meeting. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
An actual racist is one who supports racist policies.
Police Commission will now recess into closed session to discuss item 4A1 and item 4A2 in accordance to Government Code 54957. The Police Commission has concluded its work in closed session. We are now back in open session. In closed session, item 4A1 was discussed, and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted by a vote of 4-0. Item 4A2 was also discussed, and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted by a vote of 3-0. Item 4B was discussed.
Thank you very much. And now we will return to the regular agenda items. We were on agenda item 1D.
Madam President, if I could just make
Yes.
a comment for the record. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the boardroom has now been cleared of members of the public due to earlier disruptions. So now we are proceeding in open session with no members of the public present.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And we will proceed now with item 1D. And on that item, I'll ask the Commander-in-Chief to return to the table. And I'll just comment that while the room has been cleared, it is truly unfortunate that the disruptions led us to that conclusion. We are aware that a number of members of the public work very hard and diligently on analyzing and researching these issues. I myself always know that I get better informed from hearing from members of the public, and it is quite unfortunate that we are left without hearing from everyone regarding their opinions on this matter. Nevertheless, we will proceed as many warnings were given that the room would be cleared. Members of the commission, do you have any other further questions for the department on this issue?
I don't have any further questions. I just, thank you for the presentation, and also hope that you appreciate the spirit of the questioning, and also, and the goal is to make sure that we really deliver, on that guidebook that's going to be coming, and to make the process as clear as possible. So I appreciate all the work that's been put in it so far, and look forward to finishing it up with you here before too long.
Thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Soboroff, anything to add?
No, I'm supportive of the department's report, and we'll move approval.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. It's been moved for approval, I assume, with some of the, I guess I'd call them friendly amendments that were made in terms of the IG's office
Yes.
doing continued oversight and spot checking, as both myself and Mr. Bonner indicated. Is it seconded?
I'll second. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes 3-0. Thank you very much. And thank you again for your presentation. And we'll invite Commissioner Figueroa back for the remainder items. And those reporting on item 1E, if you could come to the table. This is the digital in-car video audit.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jeffrey Phillips, Commanding Officer of Audit Division. With me is Detective Jose Ceja, one of the Assistant Officers in charge at Audit Division.
Commander Alan Hamilton, representing Operations Valley Bureau.
Good morning. If you could begin this afternoon with an overview of the audit that you've presented to us.
Yes, ma'am. This is the Operations Valley Bureau Digital In-Car Video System Audit, and this is the fourth audit that was dedicated specifically at looking at digital in-car video system. We had previously conducted the audits at Operations South Bureau, Central Bureau, and West Bureau. This audit is pretty straightforward in regard to looking at the performance and functionality of the digital in-car. There's 5 audit objectives that were tested. And of the 5, the first 2 looking at activation of the DICVS and the deactivation of the system, both Valley Bureau performed relatively well in the 90th percentile. With regard to objectives 3, 4, and 5, and that was looking at checking at the start of watch and the documentation in the officer's logs or supervisor's logs, there's some room for improvement with regard to this. Now, I think one of the things that we noticed during the audit was that in looking at the department manual and what it requires, and then looking at an Office of Operations notice that's dated March 15th, 2018, that also specifies and delineates to the Bureau inspection units what they should be inspecting, we noticed that there were some things that were not in that Office of Operations notice. And when looking at what was missing, it had to do with those 3 objectives that didn't perform well. And so what we surmise is that because of the fact that the Bureau inspections weren't checking for that and weren't giving that constant feedback to the commands, then that was, as far as doing the checking, it wasn't occurring, and that's may have led to poor performance with regard to those objectives, as opposed to the objectives number 1 and number 2 that the Bureau inspection units were checking, and those objectives obviously resulted in much better compliance. And so we did make that recommendation that the Office of Operations look at that notice, and that they look at those items with regard to objectives 3, 4, and 5, and include them in what the Bureau inspection units should be looking at. That concludes my overview, and if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. And obviously, having an activation rate of 98% is quite good. Surely we'd prefer 100%, of course, and deactivation also similarly good. It's more the administrative functions, am I understanding that correctly? The administrative procedures backing up the use of this equipment is really what needs to be enhanced. Is that
yes, ma'am.
fair summary?
That is correct.
So then, Commander Hamilton, obviously it turns to you, sir. Obviously the scores on the first 2 components are very good, and the latter 3, the more administrative side, are not, and I'm sure not acceptable to you either. But can you advise us, what are you doing in the command in order to address those issues?
Certainly. So I know our response detailed a quarterly inspection, but we've actually dialed that back to a monthly. So we've got monthly numbers now that have vastly improved over the previous numbers. We have discussed the issue of digital in-car video testing at Beat Start a Watch, and brought our numbers back in line with where they should be. Like I said, we have monthly and weekly results. We've discussed it at our most recent all COs meeting and had our actual PPA supervisor, Randy Katami, discuss why it's important to make sure that your watch commanders and your field supervisors, your check-in and check-out sergeants are making sure these things are being done. So that helped us bring our numbers up. We've provided direct feedback to those commands that fall under that 95%, which is what we kind of like to see in OVB. We have had some instances where we've had low 90s. We provide immediate feedback through email and through direct communication with the commanding officers when we see that happen. So we have had a couple of instances of that occurring this year, and we immediately correct that activity directly with the COs at the division. We've provided training. We've had divisional inspections where myself and or the chief go out and do inspections of the command, and we discuss that as a topic along with body-worn video. And then we also do a bi-weekly meeting. Either myself or the chief will meet with Randy on a bi-weekly basis to discuss where we are and where we need to be. So all those things are now in place, and that has allowed us to bring our numbers up.
How does this compare with some of the other bureaus? I think this is the first audit that I have seen since I've been on the commission, but in terms of the administrative side, not the operational side.
So digital in-car video is obviously something that's evolved. They started implementation in South Bureau back in 2010, and it was very new. But the other part is that the police performance auditors being assigned to the bureaus is also relatively new. I want to say within the last couple of years, and the intent of putting police performance auditors at the bureaus was in fact to go ahead and do these types of inspections and to provide the constant feedback to the command and let them know where they are with regard to complying with various aspects. I know that they also do things with regard to body-worn video. So it's something that's evolving. At the time, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say when we the other three bureaus that we audited did not have the PPA function in place at that time. So this is probably the first time that we see the bureau inspection.
That we can
units.
pinpoint it this
Right.
accurately. Okay,
Yes,
very
ma'am.
good. Other questions from commissioners? Mr. Bonner? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, first, that just so that I'm clear, because that was my first question as well, in terms of whether there were any trends that were identified relative to other bureaus. But am I understanding that there hasn't been enough auditing as of yet to identify any particular trends one way or the other?
Right. The other,
and in particular, what you referred to the first time, the issue with these three objectives that wasn't reflected in any other audits. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Commissioner, what happened was this operations notice, if you look at it, was implemented back in March of 2018. So that was really new, and this is the first time that we did a digital in-car video audit with that notice. Prior to that, we didn't have all the documentation requirements, so there's really no direct comparison between previous digital in-car video audits.
Okay. Other question is, the first two objectives really are people activating, deactivating. Right?
Yeah, those are the high-risk objectives.
Right. And then the others that kind of get to visual inspection and you checking them at the start of watch. What do we know? Are these reliable systems? I mean, are there operational or performance issues that have been uncovered or identified? Whether it's in the start of watch or just out in the field, whatever it is.
Again, I think it was mostly administrative. The systems are actually working because if you look at the compliance rate for 1 and 2, the videos themselves are a form of documentation. I mean, the videos exist, and that's what they're doing, documenting the officer's activities. So the documentation in the log is just a redundant kind of, verifying that you recorded the video or that it's working or that the equipment is operational. But of course, if you look at objective 1, you could see it was operational because the video exists. So it's kind of redundant, objectives 3, 4, and 5. And again, the only reason they exist is because of the new operations notice that required the documentation in writing that you created a test video, that the equipment is operational. So again,
but am I understanding you with 1 and 2, the fact that we know that they're being activated and deactivated, that's evidence that they're working?
The evidence is that the video exists. They were activated, and 63 of the 64, we were able to find a video. So it's kind of like they balanced the checkbook. We just didn't keep track of the money, but the money's all there.
And Commissioner, if I might add, I was actually in operations in 2018, and from my walk down memory lane, there were some instances, and for instance, where the back rear view camera was found to be covered by a field interview card. So the camera image itself was oblique, and that came up as a result of an investigation relative to some conduct in the vehicle, and there was those types of instances in 17 and 18 in which we found parts of the system were inoperable, or someone had molested or done something to the system to obstruct it from going about its function. And when we then looked into, well, how did that occur, we found there wasn't an inspection process to pre and post start a watch to ensure the system was fully operational. So, and for instance, in the FI case, we found it rolled back to an incident to where officers sitting in the back seat of a car on a special deployment during a presidential visit or some other large-scale deployment felt uncomfortable that the camera was there recording them and had that potentiality, so they covered it, and yet they didn't uncover it at some later point. So again, the process was meant, as it was created, was in response to a lack of controls. And now Chief Arcos is here, and operations has ongoing inspections of these systems to include each of these tests and get informal inspection results on a rolling basis to ensure that compliance is there. And when we find something that is short, then to take corrective action and ensure training or remediation is done.
Leaving those examples you gave were operational or human elements, not issues with the equipment itself.
Generally not issues with the equipment, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And one question that's only, it's not, so I'm going to just try to wedge it into this anyway. Is there a similar, I haven't seen the audit plan, so I don't know, is there a similar audit planned or underway relative to body worn?
Yes, well, essentially body worn video is going to be incorporated in many of our audits. Anything so I believe the arrest, booking, and charging audit will be coming before the commission sometime soon. And obviously when we didn't have body worn video, we would go ahead and test the arrest report narratives and make sure everything was in there. But now we're comparing and looking at body worn video and reading the narrative, make sure that everything is matching, among other things. So body worn video is very much part of as many audits as we can. Anytime that there is body worn video and it's associated with whatever audit we're doing, we're going to include it.
Okay, so I don't want to vary from this particular agenda item, but I would like, when we get to that point, hopefully we'll have some conversation about the scope of that and what that will entail.
And just for your reference, and I don't recall which subcommittee, but is asking the Inspector General to do an audit on body worn video, correct, sir?
That's correct. If I can add just really briefly, I think Mr. Phillips is correct that there's really a multifaceted approach when it comes to auditing body worn cameras. For OIG, I would say the same thing, that in a number of our audits, they call upon us to watch body worn video in any case. And then as part of that, we'll be looking to see if there is general compliance with turning it on correctly. In addition, we have undertaken some work already in looking specifically at just a compliance function without looking at other subject matter. So far, it's very draft form, so I don't want to get too far off topic here. So far, the compliance seems to be consistently high level. We've seen that from the department's audits. We've seen that from our audits as well. And so we're looking to see if maybe that particular work can be spun into something with a greater value. For instance, looking at how the body worn camera had effects on complaints of misconduct, on uses of force, because we're not sure that just presenting a repeat audit sort of over and over again is going to provide value to the public and the commission. But we do have work going on that. We can shift that as any subcommittee wants us to.
Okay, appreciate that.
And yes, and so we'll look forward to that in a more comprehensive view of the body worn in the future. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Anything? Okay, seeing no further questions, is there a motion to approve the department's report as indicated? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now on to the audit recommendation status report.
Yes, ma'am. This is the audit recommendation status report. This report is prepared on a biannual basis. It looks at the status of recommendations January through June and then July through December. And this particular status report is covering January through June of 2019, wherein at that time, or in January 2019, we had 13 recommendations that were in progress from the previous period, and there's an additional 13 that were added since then. So by June, we had 26 reports to, or recommendations to report on. Of those, 15 were implemented. There was 2 that were closed out as other actions. And so therefore a total of 17 that you'll no longer see in the next report. And that left us with 9 that were in progress. Of course, each and every time that an audit report comes before you and has a recommendation, it will be added for that time period. So for example, as of today, this digital in-car audit recommendation is going to be added. I know also that there were 2 recommendations off the top of my head that have been implemented since last week with an administrative order that came out for civilian ratings.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Are there questions from the commission on this item? Go ahead.
Just a couple. Relative to the 9 that are in progress, does this, I didn't maybe read this too quickly, as whether that gives a breakout of which ones, how many of them are subject to some labor negotiations versus other budgetary or other considerations?
I found 2 that are still under, that would be attributable to budget consideration, and 1 with going back and forth between the Los Angeles Police Protective League and the IG. That's the categorical use of force process. It's on page 3 of 8 on your.
Just
your
one
attachment.
of the relative to the labor negotiations, only one
Yes,
in that
sir.
category.
That's the one I found. Yes, sir.
Okay. And my other question on that basis is, when you have how many of those, and actually it's only one, so I shouldn't say how many of those, since there's only one in this conversation, but the question just being, is that something where there's a discussion of, or a recommendation is made, and in the course of that evaluation, the league then pings you and says, oh, not so fast, we need to discuss this? Or is there anything in there, in the contract that tells you ahead of time which things you have latitude to move forward with and which ones may require some negotiation? Is that clear in terms of the question? Like which things, if you have some things, the union wants to get involved, right? And you can
Sure.
imagine why they do. What I'm asking is, how many of those areas are predictable because the contract specifies we won't make any changes in these 10 things until we come back and negotiate? Or does the union, in their following these deliberations, hear about some recommendation or change and reaches out and says to you, we're going to have an issue with this unless we negotiate it? So are there, take the one example that's in here, for example, are we negotiating it because we know the contract requires that, or because the union has reached out and said?
No, sir. Generally the former. When we are dealing with anything that changes working conditions, and this has gone on for, I was working policies and planning 20 years ago, and if there was something that was going to change working conditions, best practice for us is to bring an employee relations group and say, hey, we're talking about changing a piece of the use of force reporting process, just as we would get the police commission involved in that, because it may change the way, or digital in-car video. There's that was a negotiated special order. So if we're going to make a recommendation and then that causes us to do a special order, we'll very early on, we'll draft something up that we think is going to be the direction we want to go, and then we'll start involving the Police Protective League early on.
And I'm to close this off, I'm going to tie this going a little bit back to the conversation we had earlier this morning on the guidebook that's coming. So part of it is there any element of that where, and this is, I don't want to go too far from this agenda item, but the question then is, well, are we able to predict, because it sounds to me like you're saying, yeah, we are able to generally predict those things that are going to require some consultation with the union those are knowable. Those areas are knowable.
I think so,
Oh,
sir,
right,
yeah.
Right, okay. Right. We'll just talk later about whether there's any element of that may fall into that category. Not sure there is, but be helpful to know. Thank you.
And just to wrap up, unless there are other questions, as I understand it, this is an ongoing list, and this current list that's presented to us represents everything that is currently pending. The only items now that will fall off the list is everything that's been implemented. The things that remain in progress will be on presumably our next list, with either continuing to be in progress or completed.
Correct.
And
anything new that comes before
and
the
anything
commission.
new that comes, like you mentioned that obviously what we've just approved today is not on it, and last week.
Right.
And so it's a comprehensive list of everything that's
Yes,
pending.
it's constantly going. It serves to just keep everybody
Informed of the
abreast
status.
with where the status of recommendations are. So none of these recommendations, fall through the cracks, and they're carried through.
Very good, very good, appreciate that. And seeing no further questions, is there a motion to approve the department's report as indicated?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go have a nice day.
We'll move on to item G, which is the supplemental police account report. Does any member of the commission have a question? Does anybody have a question?
No.
I'd like a brief presentation so we have a clear record on the matter. All the commissioners have reviewed the item. There are no questions, but at the same time, I think it's important just to have a brief presentation as to what is before the commission so we have a good record. Sir?
Certainly, Commissioner. I'm Deputy Chief Chris Pitcher. I'm the commanding officer of Detective Bureau, here to discuss the supplemental police account, or what we refer to it as a SPA account. Today we're looking at the quarterly report, or the results from 2019. And as you know, the supplemental police account comes from the forfeited asset trust account. It's typically $1.5 million given to the department, and part of that is earmarked for the purchase of narcotics to combat narcotics trafficking, as well as to pay informants, ultimately to build criminal cases. And so during this second quarter of 2019, there were a total of 8 separate expenditures totaling $23,269 that was used as buy money and to pay informants for the arrests and seizures of narcotics. So for the second quarter of 2019, it has resulted in the seizure of 22 pounds of narcotics. That's heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, OxyContin, and the list goes on and on. It also resulted in the arrest of 14 individuals that were involved in narcotics trafficking, and the seizure of a little over $7,800 in cash.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any questions generated from that?
Thank you.
Nope. Seeing no hands, is there a motion to approve the department's report and transmit to the city council and city controller?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It passes 4-0. Thank you very much, Chief.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
Chief, it is time for your report, sir.
Okay. Commissioners, thank you. As is customary, I'm going to go through some discussions of significant events that occurred this last week. And I'll start with an officer-involved shooting involving a canine, an animal. On the 9th of October, Southeast Division patrol officers, responded to a radio call of an assault with a deadly weapon suspect at the 400 block of East Century Boulevard. Upon arrival to the call, the officers entered the fenced yard of the residence, and as they were checking the exterior premise, a pit bull emerged from the back of a residence. The pit bull ran in the officer's direction, causing them to redeploy backwards, and while backing away, one officer unholstered his service pistol and discharged 2 rounds in the direction of the canine to stop his advancement. The pit bull was struck and fell to the ground. Responding units transported the pit bull to the Department of Animal Services, where it was then transferred to an animal hospital in the city of Torrance, and the canine is currently undergoing medical treatment. Fortunately, there were no officers that was injured as a result of this incident. As is consistent with our protocols, Force Investigation Division detectives responded to the scene and are conducting the investigation. And We had no response by the District Attorney's Office nor the Officer Inspector General, though the Officer Inspector General will continue to monitor this investigation on behalf of the Commission. And this entire matter will be brought before a Use of Force Board and its findings to me and my recommendations to this Commission as is customary. Relative to, we've had a very busy week on a number of significant events, so I'm going to ask for your patience as I go into a couple of these matters. First, on this past Sunday, there was an article in the LA Times regarding my planned realignment of metropolitan crime suppression details and activities. This was a matter that I made a reference to a couple weeks ago, and I believe the article provided greater details. This last week, you should be aware that I also had reached out to a number of community organizations, including Earl Hutchinson of the LA Urban Policy Roundtable and other civil rights leaders, as well as the Second Call, which is a gang intervention and rehabilitation program in South Los Angeles, and also spoke with a number of other community leaders, including some of our elected officials, as to our plan as an organization to realign Metros and its current use of strategies by crime suppression. In short, the one point I want to draw to the beginning is that the article, while I think it was fair overall and accurately quoted, it referenced a term called random stops, and that this department, and specifically LAPD, Metropolitan Crime Suppression Details, would no longer do random stops. While I understand I will say that I do not understand where that term came from, and I reject and do not accept the notion that Metropolitan Crime Suppression Details, or anyone for that matter in LAPD, conducts random stops. The only point in which we conduct a random stop is in a DUI checkpoint, where there is a formal checkpoint, and on a randomized basis, by a series of a sequence of numbers, we will stop and encounter a motorist and determine whether or not that person is operating a vehicle unlawfully and unsafely on the basis of their intoxication. The inference of the article was that these stops are conducted by Metropolitan with no basis other than just a randomized basis. And that is in fact not what the investigative stops that Metropolitan or any other member of this organization conducts. So let me just clear that up right now, that what the article does speak to is that as an organization, particularly in Metropolitan Division, in our efforts to improve the safety of neighborhoods, particularly in neighborhoods that are experiencing high levels of gun violence, we have added patrols. We have dedicated additional personnel, particularly in Metropolitan Division, as well as these areas, to have added patrols that can both suppress acts by a deterrent value, as well as identify those individuals who are creating this violence by investigative stops. Those investigative stops are based on reasonable suspicion, probable cause, typically may often involve equipment violations or low-level minor traffic offenses. And in the building of and bolstering of crime suppression by Metro in 2015 was made as a directed and concerted effort to counter what we were seeing was, at the time, was a troubling increase in resurgence of violence, particularly gang violence. Over the course of year 2015 and 16 and 17, we saw the results of those added patrols, generally vehicle-borne patrols assigned to specific areas experiencing high levels of gun violence, conducting numerous vehicle stops, resulted in hundreds of arrests involving individuals carrying guns. As a frame of reference, in 2014, less than 200 guns by Metropolitan Division were seized, and by 2016 and 17, that number exceeded 700 per year. However, as we saw that, we also saw a changing, shifting pattern of violence, where the violence started receding. And in 2018, at the end of 17 and into 18, we began redeploying Metropolitan crime suppression more evenly across the city. We also began to see a reduction in the number of guns being seized. Year to date, this number, for instance, is about 150 this year to date versus last year, which was higher, and certainly 2 years ago it was at least 2 to 3 times that amount. So in looking at the effectiveness of these added patrols, also was impacted by the community's perception that's been reported in the LA Times and other sources about the feeling of being over-policed, and that this presence, this omnipresence, was actually doing more harm than good in the public's perception of their safety and the public's perception of a partnership with LAPD. This was all at the same time in which the department, under Chief Beck, and I've continued to remain steadfast in our engagement of the community in productive relationships, and engagement in problem solving, and engagement in a process that develops our youth and develops communities that feel safe to walk and move about, and not intimidated either by other members of that community, or certainly not by the police. So in looking at this, the metropolitan composition and how crime suppression, approximately 200 personnel within Metropolitan, one of 4 platoons, how they went out in practice, what we saw is 7-day-a-week deployment in which primarily they relied upon vehicle patrols in these neighborhoods that I've identified as a means of, again, deterring violence as well as identifying those responsible. In looking at the statistics of the outcomes, we found that seldom and rarely did they actually make an arrest and identify an individual. They would, out of 100 stops, for instance, make approximately 1 or 2 arrests. And so as a department, and influenced by this report, as well as by our own community engagement and listening to the various stakeholders that I visited, as well as members of my command staff and divisional commanders, we challenged ourselves to shift gears. This past 8 or 9 months, we've asked Metropolitan Crime Suppression to exercise investigative efforts that would result in a less of a reliance on vehicle stops as a primary means of their crime suppression activities. This over the summer, realizing that the organizational makeup sometimes influences and can greatly influence what actual organizational practices occur, I challenged Chief Frank and the command staff within Metro to talk with the Metro officers to identify an organizational structure that would minimize the use of these vehicle stops as a standard bearer or standard investigative strategy, and instead identify investigative strategies that would continue to identify those individuals involved in gun violence, and not just identify them, but affect their arrests and their prosecution. Additionally, in other parts of the city that weren't experiencing high levels of gun violence, what other investigative strategies to help and support those local areas in the sense of identifying those individuals involved in burglaries, auto thefts, and other types of crimes that go to the safety of those communities. Just 2 weeks ago, that proposal came back to me, and working with my direct reports, I believe that it is going to allow us to continue to evolve Metro from what it has been into an organization that will continue to provide for the support for the local area captains and local area stations to lower crime by adding additional personnel and using strategies that go to solve crime, particularly violent crime, and also identify those individuals responsible and ensure their arrest and their removal from our community as the risk that they pose to our communities. This is going to involve what's called an organization of each of the 4 geographic platoons that will be dedicated to follow-up investigations to assist detectives in identifying those offenders that we have information from victims that have committed crimes, and ensure their apprehension and they're brought before the criminal justice system. Additionally, there was a reference in the city attorney's office when we talked about the dismissal of warrants that were at least 5 years old, that there was a whole another group of warrants, some 7,000 individuals that had committed violent crimes that had active warrants for their arrest, and those individuals most recently had not been apprehended because of a lack of available department resources. Our intention is to utilize Metropolitan in this new manner to focus on those individuals whose crimes, as alleged, still they have not had their day in court, but has been sufficient to identify them as a wanted individual by a judge issuing a warrant for their arrest, and will allow Metro, based on the areas of town in which they work, to assist in identifying and apprehending those individuals. So shifting of this, it will go away from a reliance of 7 days a week, having 50 to 60 individuals working in a crime suppression mode of vehicle stops, to instead have those individuals geared toward those individuals who we believe is actively committing crime and is absconded from their capture. Lastly, in the organization, this organization on a broad basis we've made substantial shifts in the amount of investment in in-service training that we're committed to. De-escalation training, command and control training, new emerging training called arrest and control, which allows officers to refresh skills on dealing with open-handed individuals who are resisting and fighting and posing a risk to the officers and the public. Those training responsibilities currently are borne by dedicated training personnel at Training Division, but augmented by personnel from operations because we simply don't have enough instructors. It is my intention to take a portion and assign a portion of Metropolitan crime suppression resources, some of the best trained, most qualified, best experienced officers, and in lieu of operations having to have adjunct professors or adjunct instructors, this will come from Metro. This is something that has been suggested earlier, and I believe that and organically within Metro, I believe that they'll be well suited for this ancillary function. And in looking at this, I will tell you that I'm bringing this today because it is a point in the LA Times. It is significant. I will be meeting with Metropolitan Crime Suppression personnel on tomorrow to have this discussion, and I'm also finally aware of the recent remarks attributed to the directors of the LEPPL and their criticism of this. And as I said yesterday to a reporter, and I'll repeat here, the LEPPL and myself as chief, we share our common interest of Los Angeles being a safe city, being a prosperous city, that this second largest city in the country be that city on the hill. And the use of Metro previously, I think, has served that purpose. I believe that the evolution of Metro into this newer role and refined role will continue to serve that purpose. I look forward to working with them for them to better understand and for also to give this time for us to reach the mutually agreed upon ambitions and goals. And I believe that we will find that consensus over time. I have previously spoken to League President Director Lally in advance of this coming to public knowledge, and I know that Vice President Doretta Sandoz was also briefed from a senior member of my staff. So we see the League as partners in this, and we see that while there can be some initial uncertainty and hesitation as to concern of how this may roll out in the streets, I will say that I believe we'll find common ground, and while preserving critical functions as follows. Thursday night, as a fire developed in Los Angeles, and we were required to have a Herculean lift of getting resources into the northern part of the San Fernando Valley to begin evacuations that would then take place for the next 12 to 15 hours. It was Metropolitan Division that allowed us to move 60 uniformed personnel, trained, well-equipped, on an emergency basis into those neighborhoods, in addition to E-Platoon, which assisted in the evacuation of countless horses that were also in peril. So Metropolitan ability, these changes will not impact the macro ability for us to muster well-trained, equipped, and enabled individuals on natural and man-made disasters of a variety of different origins. And also, we will continue, as we've discussed with Second Call and other gang interventionists, we will return to using heavy deployments of vehicle patrols in neighborhoods that have a back and forth of gang violence, a spasm where retaliation shootings start heightening and the loss of life is in jeopardy. That very action was actually asked for in some of our discussions with gang interventionists of saying, not to, proverbially, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. While we don't want those patrols every day, there are instances in which those types of added deployments are necessary while interventionists work behind the scenes to quell violence, as well as investigators work to identify those responsible and bring them to justice. So I will say to the critics of Metropolitan Division that will throw this wholesale criticism, that we find the people who are in the streets working with us day to day do see a need and value of this very specific vehicle investigative stop practice, and we agree with them though that use should be carefully monitored and calibrated so as not to have an undue impact on the community's trust and confidence, and that we will use those resources judiciously. I there may be comments or conversations. If I might just go through a few more of my remarks and then and welcome that. Last Thursday was LAPD Day, in which we were able to recognize more than 300 men and women of this organization, sworn and civilian, for their outstanding work. I'm pleased to report that more than 1,100 people filled that room. It was a very encouraging afternoon and lunch, and it was enjoyable to see families and friends to have a moment to recognize the outstanding work that those within the audience received these awards. Additionally, on Saturday, I attended the Valley Disaster Preparedness Fair in the San Fernando Valley. It was actually Northridge. And then Sunday, I was at the Holy Family Church in Wilmington. And now closed by my significant events as far as the events of Thursday night with the Saddle Ridge Fire. I could, as a member of this department, could not be prouder of the men and women of the LAPD who at every level, whether they were responding to those fire-filled hills and conducting evacuations in very dangerous and uncertain circumstances, or they worked at communications handling 911 calls, or they were on a patrol in West LA, still trying to maintain the peace and harmony of the city during such a catastrophic event. To a person, I am proud of their work, their dedication, their tireless commitment to lean forward and to find ways to struggle and work through this catastrophic event. I want to say that the ingenuity was in the establishment of caravans allowed us to transport more than 600 people to traverse a closed freeway from the San Fernando Valley to the Santa Clarita Valley, where many of our personnel, fire and police and other first responders reside. And those caravans largely assisted our ability to rehab, to get officers into work as well as get officers home to get a few hours of rest. And then the revisiting centers where these evacuations of nearly 100,000 people in tens of thousands of homes, the ability to support and allow those individuals a momentary time to get back in their home and collect some essentials, including medicine and other supplies, change of clothes, and just making sure if they had an animal or something left behind that they could take care and custody of those. Not done anywhere else in American policing that I'm aware of, but our men and women, they made it happen. They formulated the plan, and I'm proud of them. I'll close by one aspect of that. This was less than 48 hours in duration, and it points out to me just how unprepared we are as a city, as residents. I believe that the public services enterprises are some of the best trained and best equipped of any emergency services across America. But we are made up of an origin of 4 million people in a region of 10 million that struggled to withstand an evacuation of less than 48 hours. And that is very troubling to me when shelters space, which was limited but was full, of about 500 personnel. It speaks that in an earthquake, when it occurs, in the type of catastrophic event that we expect it to be, is that we have our hands full. And as a region, we've got to continue to commit ourselves to preparedness and self-reliance. And as communities, the ability to work block by block, that it's going to take 3 to 7 days for law enforcement and public and first responders to be able to render aid and get resources into those neighborhoods. And this most recent episode, I think, is telling in the sense of showing us while a community was well supportive of law enforcement, it was also struggled to deal with such an inconvenience in such a short duration. So I think that this gives us an opportunity to think and reflect and do a better job not as first responders. I think we need to tell the story and talk about it, but as residents, we often need to question ourselves. Could we survive? Would we have medicine, food, and water and other supplies necessary to be self-sufficient for 7 days? When we move into crime personnel and then take conversations or questions and comments. As to crime, this past week, we continue to see an overall reduction in violent and partner crimes. We have 206 homicides this year versus 197 last year. That's 9 additional homicides. We have 9 additional shooting victims this year versus last. So our reduction in crime across the categories has continued to perpetuate itself as we move towards the end of the year. Towards our in regards to the gang-related crimes, we're plus 12. So we have just a slight increase of overall gang crime this year versus last. So those numbers through the summer have improved. Relative to officer-involved shootings, we, as of this past Saturday, have had 20 officer-involved shootings this year. Last year to date, that number was 26. And as has been remarked about in-custody deaths, this year to date, I will now include those numbers in my weekly reports. In-custody deaths this year are 4. Last year, that number was 5. As a reminder, each of those in-custody deaths were fully investigated by the Force Investigation Division, as well as with oversight by the Office of the Inspector General, and those reports via me are sent and forwarded to the Commission for its appraisal. Regarding traffic collisions, we have seen a slight reduction in in traffic collisions involving fatalities. We're at 179 this year versus 182 last year. Our challenge remains in motor vehicles versus pedestrians, where this year we've had 96 individuals that have died as a result of a motor vehicle versus pedestrian collision. Last year that number was 94. To show the strikingness of this, in 2015, that number was 61. So clearly distracted walking, distracted driving are huge issues for us as Angelenos and an area that we need to continue our focus. Regarding personnel strength, as of this, the 28th of September, we have 9,985 total sworn police officers with the organization, 2,908 civilian personnel, 387 reserves, and 1,724 cadets. By the way, our reserves rallied to the call, and actually a number deployed over the weekend, assisting us in those fire-impacted areas to help patrols and a variety of tasks, and I'm grateful for that. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chief. I'll just open up by thanking all the men and women in the department and thanking you for your service, particularly during the fires. Everyone served this city extraordinarily well in both the evacuations and then helping individuals return to their homes and residences. I'd be remiss if we didn't also thank all the members of the Los Angeles Fire Department for their extraordinary work over the last week. And I'll just comment briefly on your report on the shifting resources, particularly as to Metropolitan Division, but also with respect to all the divisions. And thank you for listening to the community and their concerns and trying to be very nimble with the use of your resources and redirecting them. I assume you'll continue to collaborate in the future, hear from the community, but also analyze crime data as it's coming in to determine the effectiveness of this approach. Is that, I assume that's
yes,
correct?
Yes, that is correct. We're never done.
We're never done. It's always an iterative process of trying to improve and use the resources you have. But I'm sure community members will want to continue to provide feedback on that as well. And hopefully you can work continuously with the PPL to ensure there is that ongoing collaboration, but also I think you referred to it as being common ground, that you do find that common ground on this issue, because we certainly don't want to see a divide there.
That's right.
We understand everybody can have differences of opinions on this very important issue on how to deploy the resources, but they are a valued partner, and I do hope they continue to come to the table and talk to you about these issues.
Yes.
Any comments?
You both covered my question, and that was about the PPL and collaboration and the importance and the willingness from both sides. And I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll start with that. Relative to the changes in Metro, what would you say about the when you go back to some years ago when I believe it was Chief Beck and it was then kind of ramping that up? What is the status relative to the conditions on the ground that caused that initial deployment now? Has that changed in any way, or
Yes, I think two things have happened. As a reminder, that in that summer of 2015, there was 100 murders in 100 days. There was a rumored social media went viral as to gang members that would go out and had challenged each other to who could first commit 100 murders in 100 days. In the backdrop of that was an increase from 14 to 15 in shooting violence and gang violence. And so the organization was seeing, and after a period of about 5 years of back-to-back decreases in violent crime. Those changes, those situations have largely been abated. However, we still have too much of a prevalence of gang crime and shooting violence in South Los Angeles. So gang suppression through the violent suppression through these added patrols, I believe in 16 and 17, had the desired results and also achieved identifying and removing a number of guns off of the street. Those guns were murder weapons, if you will, and were, I believe, could have, if not had not been removed, we would have seen numbers even more greatly increased. But in 2018 and now in 2019, I've seen the impact of those vehicle stops have a diminishing return, a significantly larger, in my view, today, diminishing return as far as the recovery of those weapons. We still need to get those weapons off the street. Gun violence is still too high. It's just that tool of vehicle stops, however, not giving the return on that investment and seeing the counter forces of how some communities are complaining that they're being particularly over-policed and racially profiled and biased in the actions. While I don't believe officers are engaged in that, the officers are doing what I'm asking them to do, which is rely upon vehicle investigative stops. Seeing the low return, we'll work with operations and the 4 geographic bureau chiefs to assign those resources to do investigative follow-ups, to identify those people who are involved in crime, not so much on a matter of while you're in the field, do you see this individual, but how do we investigatively follow up and identify and apprehend those individuals so that they're not continuing to tote guns and use and be trigger pullers for future crimes. So,
Chief, are buybacks still efficient?
Buybacks are much more each year we work with the mayor's office and a lot of philanthropic support to have a buyback of guns, assault weapons, handguns, long rifles. Generally, I'll say, it is representative of reminding Angelenos to lock it and hide their weapons, because many guns in Los Angeles that end up in criminal hands are stolen from residences because they're left in drawers and in closets unsecure. Buybacks offer an individual to say, do you really need this weapon? And we can, we'll pay you for that weapon, and remind people of gun safety and the fact that if you have a gun, you're 20 times more likely to have that gun used against you than you already use it in defense of yourself. So I think gun buybacks have that role, but recognizing more than 300 million firearms were sold last year in America, there's more guns than there are people, that's just one strategy. The larger strategy is how do we focus on gun violence, those that are involved in that gun violence, and I believe the realignment of metro resources are going to allow us to do that more effectively.
Thank you. And I think that's part of my observation, though, is that there's a lot of nuance that's not captured in some of the public conversation. In other words, the idea that you had this deployment and the pushback based on disparate impacts and so on is as true as some elements of that is. There's a more nuanced story about the evolution of the problem that you're trying to solve, right?
Yes.
And the complexities around that. So I just encourage you to as the conversation continues and you think about the redeployment as well, that we look for ways to bring that forward so that there is an appreciation for the fact that we're now not just retooling in the face of concerns, but that this is a strategy that reflects the realities of the conditions that we're seeing today and will be equally, if not more, impactful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Couple other questions I had going backward. One on the canine shooting. I could have asked this also in connection with any OIS, but in that one in particular, when you have the cost that you have this canine that's been transported and treated and so on, is that a public expense or department expense, or how is that covered?
Generally, it's going to be a department expense, a public expense.
Okay. Yeah. And then also I wanted to, I was mentioning to you earlier that especially, I think it's appropriate to ask you this, and these are a couple things that didn't happen here in Los Angeles, but they're, I think have, impact on the thinking of the public here as well. There was a shooting of an officer in, I believe it was an ambush of some kind, in a parking garage in Maryland, I believe it was.
Yes.
And then we also, I think a lot of us have seen that the conversation around the shooting of the innocent woman in her home in Fort Worth as well. And the question really is can you just comment briefly on how it is that I'm sure everybody here is, observes those kinds of situations, but from a department standpoint, how do you capture any lessons to be learned from either of those situations? I mean, formally, aside from just everybody talking about it
Sure.
at the cooler.
One thing is and I heard the mayor remark about this the other day relative to the fire and the origin of the fire, is that whatever preliminary information you have, you can generally anticipate that it's wrong. So in regards to both those instances, both are very troubling for what is on the public airways of being said. An officer being ambushed and suddenly attacked without provocation speaks to our officers' vigilance, and they're exercising the need to be mindful of their surroundings, to be the contact cover concept that we have officers deployed in pairs, that we take our safety critically, that we recognize. We just released a video a few days ago of officers that were ambushed by an assailant here in Hollenbeck area, where a gunman just runs up on the vehicle and by the grace of God missed the officers, a round fired through their window. So those are safety briefings and discussions that we use the information from that shooting in a very light sense. Fort Worth, I think, is a similar example. Only things I have is that we have a woman who was shot and killed in her home while she was babysitting or providing child care for an 8-year-old, and the officer has resigned and has been arrested for murder. Why that shot was fired, by the visual, what's been known to this point is it doesn't appear to be justified. But what I would say to our officers is that, in fairness to this entire process, is we take that and recognize that our efforts of de-escalation, of knowing the information that you have and acting on that needs to be reasonable. You need to exercise restraint, rely on good tactics and good communications to minimize accidents and minimize instances in which we resort to force that is an error or wrong. Because the consequences, you can never pull it back. You can't pull the bullet back. So our officers are involved in such trying and difficult circumstances every day and every hour. So we use the Fort Worth incident to remind them of the criticality that they rely on training. They work with their partner. They utilize their tools and they exercise restraint, that they come to work well rested. They take care of themselves. Those are all things without passing judgment, because in fairness, in both instances, I don't have enough information to make such a critical decision that should be based on facts. And right now, I think in both instances, we have reported information which I can act on and say I'm troubled by, but I can't make decisions any more than I can an officer-involved shooting here that we have without all the facts. I think the entire process deserves a more measured consideration.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, for all the reasons you're describing, you refrain from drawing an opinion or a conclusion about the incident. But at the same time, and I think what you also just answered is that you can, even without the ultimate conclusions, draw some early reminder points, for lack of a better term, in other words. And is that a roll call conversation, or what's the? It's
a roll call conversation. It's a hallway conversation. It's a conversation between partners. It's a chief's message. It's information that goes on in the academy classes today and in service classes. Yesterday, I was at the academy while we're having crisis negotiation training. So we're talking about real life events today and how do you overcome those trying circumstances. And these world events have a way of coloring into that as well. Yes.
And one last question on going back now to the fire.
Sure.
And it's not a question about that fire. It's the question about the preparedness. You know, we think a lot about those types of issues because of whether, like, if they're whether they're in a rural area or the complexities of moving large communities. But there's also, I know over the years have been conversations about some of the challenges, you know, in like downtown Los Angeles. I mean, if you had, whether it was a dirty bomb or an earthquake or the need just to evacuate large numbers of people out of downtown Los Angeles. And it's my understanding, at least from historical conversations, that there's a lot of questions around our ability to effectively undertake that. I mean, largely because you can't train on that the way you imagine if you tied up traffic to do a contraflow operation or something. We don't really have the ability to do a lot of real-time training with the public. So I'm sure you do the tabletop and all those kinds of things. But I'm asking for what's your general assessment about the level of readiness for a major event in downtown Los Angeles?
I believe the shelter in place is largely going to be, is what our emergency officials are going to be dependent upon, whether it's a dirty bomb or it's an earthquake or, you know, man-made or otherwise. The ability to move 4 million people out of a region made up as Los Angeles, downtown 1.5 million, in a freeway network that, if, say, it's an earthquake, will be largely unavailable. Is that, again, I think it speaks to the need for people to recognize they're not going to have the ability to escape to Santa Barbara. They're going to be stuck here, and they're going to largely be stuck in their own neighborhood. And then it'll be upon Public Works and the public enterprise to reestablish ingress and egress, in and out, and getting in there, getting resources in and getting people out. And those are what emergency managers talk about. I will tell you that during the port exercise that we just had, we welcomed Fleet Week here, that a day-long session was talking with our defense partners in the Navy about what safeguards and what the plan would be for the armed forces to bring logistical support to this region. And that is that there's no other country in the world that has our ability to do that lift and that logistics, and yet at the same time the first week will be extremely problematic of just bringing sufficient water supplies and food supplies and sheltering into this region, even though we have the full support of the federal partners and as well as our partnership with private industry and commerce. The reality is, what we train our people about is that Home Depot becomes perhaps a depot for us, and that, you know, what can we safeguard for food supplies and logistical supplies as we try to get a region stabilized while additional help is coming from the outside in. Lastly, the casualty rates are Armageddon. I mean, they're terrible. The dirty bomb exercises that we've gone through, a nuclear detonation above ground would easily have walking wounded 10 to 15 times the size of what our medical facilities can support. And we'll get into exercises about the plume and where that plume goes and how to protect. And there's a lot of conversation about those in theory, but as a seasoned individual that has seen the difficulties we have in simple communications, it goes back to people are going to need to be prepared for themselves. They're going to need to have means of establishing contact with one another and be resilient and being able to self-sustain, because each of those scenarios in a city such as ours or anywhere in America can offer substantial challenges if their lifeline is external. It needs to be internal.
I just say that I think we have collectively the department has some important role to play in continuing to get that message out, because I think a lot of people still assume that the answer is to call 911 and then the cavalry comes and everybody's got the assistance they need. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I'll move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
We
you.
are adjourned. Thank you so much.